James, last week they heard me talk about my story with hostility. I know what that was like preaching in that.
Yeah.
But you have more experience of preaching in apathy. And though there's maybe not as much of a dramatic story around the apathy, I think a strong argument can be made that a pastor preaching in a church revitalization context and apathy is what he experiences week in and week out when he preaches is actually harder
That's right.
than what I experienced in preaching in hostility for a few years.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be true? I mean, to the difficult level of apathy in preaching that, and why?
Well, I think it can persist longer than preaching in hostility.
Yeah.
Because hostility will bring it to a point of conflict. Something has to give. The pressure will mount. And it may not be able to persist as long, but apathy, I think, can persist longer. Let's qualify it a little bit. When I came to Parkway, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of people who love the Word and sit under the Word and have been shaped by it. Now, I stepped into a situation where they had not ever had an expository ministry. So the idea of expository messages and expository series, all that was new. And there have been tons of people who responded and have been shaped by it and have come to understand and appreciate and even love expository ministry. But there are also dozens and dozens and hundreds of people who did not appreciate it. But instead of revolting against it, it was an apathy. It was almost indifference to it. Okay, that's what he's going to do. I'll endure that sermon and get through that, and let's get on to the things that I really enjoy.
Get on with my day after that.
That's exactly right.
So I knew exactly where the narcolepsy section was in our church for years. But a lot of times it was just really older folks sitting on hard pews. It wasn't that they didn't care. Just kind of hard to stay awake when you sleep that long and you get older. If we live to be 90, I'm sure we'll know what that's like.
Happen. Yeah.
So I pretty much knew the solution there as far as if you put that in the apathetic category. What does a pastor do when he realizes he's preaching to apathy? What can a pastor do to help try to do something about the apathy?
Yeah, so pray a lot, right? What we need is that the Lord would do a work through His Word, and that's what He promises to do. So we want Him to bring the fruit. And if hearts are going to be enlivened to love and appreciate the Word, that's what's going to have to happen. So we have to pray, persist in it. So the things that we are commanded to do, let's be faithful in it. Let's be faithful in our study, and let's be faithful in our sermon development and delivery. And so there's something to be said that sometimes indifference to your preaching isn't indifference to your preaching because it's not good preaching. Sometimes they're bored because it's boring.
That's right. Yeah,
and let's evaluate our own preaching. And that's even part of my story, and thinking about the last 10 years and even before that. Part of the pushback against the preaching was that it needed to improve. And that's the first place that we ought to look, is in the mirror.
Right.
So if they're apathetic, it might be because you're not delivering good sermons, if we could just use that term we do in the book. We talk about what it means to be a good sermon. But when you're facing apathy, you need to persist in it and pray, and then also teach the people how to listen to sermons. There's, just people don't know. They've never experienced it before. They don't know that they ought to prepare beforehand and come ready, and that they can read the text ahead of time and already begin to think about the questions they would have and lean forward, expecting the explanations to maybe the questions that they would have, and how much more fruitful that will be. But you have to train them to do that too.
What a novel idea that pastors not only to preach, but actually shepherd to help them hear the Word. What an interesting process to go through.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate you focusing on prayer. That can be just the kind of the quick thing that we throw out there is the Sunday school answer. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about God being at work in people through His Word. And so apathy is a spiritual condition in many ways.
Yep.
And so for the pastor to be praying that God would enliven the congregation to receive, that's really legitimate. And it doesn't happen in months, right? It's years that it takes that.
That's exactly right. Again, ultimately what we want is a spiritual work to be done in them. And it won't be done on the quality of the delivery of your sermon. It'll be done because the Lord does His work by His Spirit.
Yeah, that's good.